The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. My name is Dr. Owen Campbell, and with me as always is Dr. Brian Wolf, and together we are Physiogrowth. We run a mastermind program. You can look it up in the show notes because I always screw up the school group, but we have a website, physio-growth.com. So if you want to learn more from us and you want to participate in Q&As, look at some of the stuff we have out there for just everything from scaling to just starting your practice, all that, hit us up, look at that stuff. But today we are talking about the lovely mistress of cash flow. So in previous offerings, we have talked about what makes a decision to do a cash-based physical therapy business versus insurance. Do I take Medicare right away? Do I take all of them right away? Do I just go all cash? And one of the biggest things Brian has always said is that his recommendation is to start with cash because it's very good on cash flow right away. If you're starting to build up yourself as a business, your marketing, things like that, you don't have to wait 6 months to get paid or credentialed or anything like that. So that's what I did. So regular listeners know that I've had a cash pay PT business in Phoenix for about the past year. I've been a PT for 14 years, but I've a lot on the corporate side. But now what happened is, of course, I did the terrible thing and I took a vacation. And when you don't have PTO, my Lord, does that crush your day when you come back and you realize your cash flow is not great. So one of the things that I did do, or at least I tried to do, and I will say I was not as disciplined about it as I should have been, is I tried to sock a little away each time that I paid myself so that when we did take this vacation, I would not be like not paying the mortgage, right? So we're good on that. But man, you spend every single week saying, okay, did I see enough patients to hit my targets? And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, I haven't been marketing all week and I didn't see patients last week. What's going on? So Brian's like, let's do a show on that. Let's tell everybody. Let's tell everybody your misery. Yeah.
Well, I think, and I appreciate. Here's the thing for people listening, right? Like these are real life problems that Owen's having, right? Real life things that people go through and don't go through. I'm like, that's why I'm like happy that Owen shared it, because it's one of those things where like, if people think that Owen's the only person ever to do this, they're freaking crazy, right? Like, so Owen's going through a process right now where like he's seeing the cash flow side of it. And there's a big difference between what something's worth and what cash flow is. So what the valuation of a company and cash flow, right? So the thing about what Owen's thinking about, it's cash flow is just purely money in, money out. The reality is when you're a solopreneur like this, and where Owen is, whether you take insurance or not, right? Essentially, money stopped coming in all of a sudden, right? And so because of that, money flowing out needs to be regulated to a certain degree, or you need to turn the spigot back on and bring money back in. So that's the reality of what cash flow gets smashed here. And now I'll tell you the funniest one, Owen. When do you start hiring employees? And then the first thing that happens when you go from doing what Owen's doing, a solopreneur, and then you got people who go out on PTO and you realize you still have to pay them even though they're not making you any money. Now you want to talk about slapped your cash flow. First time I realized, I was like, wait a minute, how do we do the PTO thing? We're like, we pay them. And I was like, oh, Jesus. So not only are they're not bringing any money, the cash flow stops on their end, you're having to pay them for that time out. So it's a double whammy. Yeah. And again, so when people think about, when PTs listening to this being like, oh, I get PTO and I want more time for PTO, well, realize you're not making any money for the practice when you're leaving. So therefore, if there's certain practices, it's like, don't take that for granted. That is a really nice benefit that you get when you leave. And so obviously, if we were like, nope, you could never take any time off, like we wouldn't have any employees. So, there's people, but I know that people at hospitals get 5 weeks of PTO. That's because those hospitals suck to work for. And therefore that's why you get 5 weeks of PTO. Right. So realize it's probably somewhere in the middle of where you want to be. So anyway.
Well, and I think that it's important too, for anybody who, from your side, you're dealing with how do I deal with PTO on the budget sheet, right? And making sure that you're able to withstand that when you send somebody an offer, right? Whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, whatever it is, right? And
And I'm joking, by the
planning.
way. We can play our PayPal PTO.
I know,
I'm very happy that you did.
I know.
But my point being is, it was a little shocking the first time,
Yeah.
when you did it. So anyway, go ahead.
But planning, I think, is the big key here, right? So I think that I'm happy I did the planning. I think now, knowing we have another, like a short vacation coming up, right? So I have kind of a half week where, I was actually really successful before I left on this vacation to cram a whole week into 2 days, before I left on a 10-day vacation. So A, planning that way was good, but then also B, I did have some money put away, but I think I just underestimated it, right? So
Yeah.
now I have to make sure that in my next 3 months before the next time we go when their kids are on spring break, that I'm making sure that it's a little bit more, right? Because there were unforeseen things of, it just things that happen in a normal course of care. Like, well, I think I'm good. I'm not going to do that next package, right? Or actually, I'm going away for 3 weeks. Forgot to tell you, those types of things. So I think just if I could do it, well, when I do it all over again, I'm just going to plan a little. I would put a little bit more padding in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like in general, when you think about, somebody who's thinking about cash flow and how do you, look, this is where that catchword that I hate, passive income, comes in, right? Like where people think about like, how can I do things? There's when you're a solopreneur, and here's the thing. When we think about cash flow businesses and asset businesses, what we're thinking about is you're going to basically take the money that you're making within the business to reinvest back in the business to try and grow an asset. So like, for instance, I'm not currently sitting in my office right now, but the business is still making money. And that's because we pay other people and pay them PTO so that ultimately they can go and they can make more money for the business as a whole to keep moving the mission forward. And it
So
means we
you
can
are
help
an
more people.
asset business. Just to
Yes.
clarify this for people listening, right
Yeah.
now as a solopreneur, I'm more of a cash flow business. And then
Yes.
for someone like Brian, who has 5 clinics, multiple employees, all that stuff, he's more of an asset building business
No
where
doubt
cash
about it.
flow is kind of pretty much set with what you're trying to do, but really you're putting to try and make it a bigger thing to sell eventually.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? So think about this, right? So if I think about the cash that's in my business, right, and the cash flow that Owen's talking about, because cash flow issues will never stop.
Mhm.
Facebook. I'll give you a great example. Indeed.com. I'm sure you've heard of them, Owen, right? That
Yep.
company. I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, right? Indeed just had some layoffs. Well, what probably happened at layoffs? Cash flow problems probably happened. So all
Mhm.
of a sudden you're hiring all these people, right? What is we talked about? You got to think about limiting expenses walking out the door. Well, guess what? Sometimes that's salaries. And so when you hear about like Facebook when they laid off 11,000 people, when you hear about, any like, great example, one of my favorite ones was Elon Musk bought Twitter and was like, what the hell are half these people doing? He fired like 95% of the staff because he realized he could do the same thing because that company wasn't making that much money. It was sold as an asset for a high, like, 44 billion, $48 billion. The
Mhm.
reality was the asset and what the cash flow were are two completely different things. The
Yeah.
reality is the valuation of that tech space was the actual ability to be able to reach a giant crowd of people through Twitter,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
in theory, when you think about valuation assets, they're two different things, right? My valuation is how much my business is worth and how much I could sell it for. And that's whatever number you can actually get. My cash flow is money in, money out. So when you think
Mhm.
about cash flow problems, they're pretty normal within any business. I think to think about it, so I think what's interesting is a kind of a thing to build on with this topic is, well, all right, say Owen, is your cash flow business, and say you're like, hey, I want to get to the asset aspect. Well, what do I do? How do I do
Yep.
that? The reality of what you would do is you have to reinvest the money back into something. And I'm going to give you an
Mhm.
example because the reality of what's going to happen is you're going to run out of time at some point. So
Yep.
you want to think about a one-to-many model or something along those lines, or something that's also passive that you can do without actively seeing people. So
Yeah.
something that Owen can think about doing that's involved is some sort of system that he sets up where people are paying him for something that he doesn't need to be with them in person. Because the
Mhm.
reality is he could do that anywhere. That's a big thing in the online fitness industry, right? Like, oh, like that's what you see. Oh, do you want 5 to 10 clients that you can manage and you can travel the world? You could be in Bali while you're training your people. First off, you're still fucking working. The passive income doesn't exist, people. It does
Yeah.
not exist. If it sounds too good to be true, that's a classic. It is too good to be true. But the
Yeah.
reality is, like, to get to a point where, like, even what I'm currently doing with passive income, I'm still working my ass off. I'm still working all the time. And
Mhm.
but it just means that I get to do what I need to do and what I love to do to work on the business. So going back to the model here, say Owen's like, hey, Brian, I'm making X amount of dollars. Now I want to start to go into an asset. The reality of what most people have to do, make as much money as they possibly can, live off almost as little as they can,
Yeah.
and reinvest the money that they've got back into the business. And by the way, when people talk about tax benefits, and I'm not an accountant, so PSA, don't take the accounting advice and get pinched. But the reality is, like, if I take, you're only taxed on the net amount. So say I'm like, I can live off of $80,000, right? Let's just use this number, and I
Yeah.
make 170 seeing patients. The reality is that other, $90,000 can be reinvested into the business. And
Yeah.
ultimately, if I can do that, I can reinvest it into other people. That now it's like, all right, maybe I can hire a therapist at,
Mhm.
part-time for $45,000, $50,000, right? Or maybe I can hire a full-time person at this amount of money, right? And by doing that, that risk allows you to essentially make more money if the two of you are working your ass off to do that, right? I can hire a front desk person and make it more efficient. I can hire a trainer to add a different service. So the idea is that's how you would do it. So the people that are like, well, I'm making 170,000 and I can't take $1 less. By the way, nothing wrong with that. Just
Yeah.
be freaking prepared to not have an asset. Like, that's all that is, right? So
Yeah.
again, you got to think about it and what you want to do, but the reality is you got to reinvest into what you're doing and building if you want to actually build an asset.
Well, and that's where, someone in the person between us, right? Like the person where what I'm planning to be, right? Where I'm taking a set amount each week. If I have a great week, that goes into the business account. It doesn't come back out, right? And I don't buy like a jet ski or whatever. Um, those are the strategic planning steps you have to take as a solopreneur to get to things like, do I have my own space, do I hire my first employee, those types of things. And the pot of gold at the end of that rainbow is, well, if I have another employee also producing as much, then I right, like you said, okay, if you want to make $170,000 a year and save none of it, great, that's a good job, right? But if you want to have a business that, say, you have two people making 170, right, and the other person is not taking a salary of 170, right,
Yeah.
they're being able to put their earnings they become business money, right? Then you start being able to see, okay, this is how I can build a clinic. This is how I can do that. So it's important. Managing your cash flow is very, very important in the beginning, but having an understanding of what you want is very important, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's where I think that it's the different. You kind of find out early if you're one of those PTs who wants a big business or who doesn't, right? And
Yeah.
I have two really good friends. Both of them have two completely different options of where what they're doing with their money right now. But if you look at them from the outside, they're the exact same company.
Yeah.
Right?
And
In
look,
5 years, they're going to be totally different.
and this is like, what we teach in physio growth, right? Like, this is the idea behind it, is like, there's neither, I think there's a cohort of people that make you feel bad about doing one thing or the other, right? But the reality is, people can be wildly successful in either way, right? It's not,
Yep.
if your goal is to just retire someday and have a nest egg of money that you want to leave to your kids, and you want to impact patients, you want to treat the way you want to do it, you could do it literally in either way, either an asset type business or by building, and saving, right? That's fine too. You're going to be doing great. And I know I have a buddy who has a super successful practice. He basically makes like 300K a year. He lives off at 100 plus, and he pays a buttload of money in taxes, but he invests the other 100. And like, the dude's gonna pace to retire it between 45 and 50, and
Yeah.
he's killing it. And so the reality is, like, you can do very well like that too, guys. Like, it's not. And,
Yeah.
and by the way, don't let anybody make you feel bad about that.
Yeah.
That's awesome, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is like, I think at Physio Growth, we've recognized this with a lot of people, is that, like, There's some people that are trying to have certain goals, and so the goal is just how to get there. So if people want help with that kind of stuff and learn, what it takes to market, what it takes to scale, what it takes to grow, that's the type of stuff we're doing. So visit visio-growth.com. We can talk to you a little bit more about how that works.
Absolutely. All right, man. Well,
cool.
That's
lightning
it for
fast one today.
I like it. Little nugget for your ride home.
Exactly.
All right.
Cool. All right, see you, man.
All right, see ya.